To start with, no, I'm not resigning. I still have flip-flops on. Get over it. It's for a point, and so I'll get to that. But it amuses me how just change of dress, change of seat, change of parking space can affect so much. We've been in this series called Radical, and what we're discussing how Jesus called his followers to live. He called us to a higher standard. He called us to discipleship. I think Christian, the term Christian is used so loosely these days that it's lost its definition. But Jesus actually called us to a higher calling, and he called it disciple. We talked about week 1, about what that looks like. Week 2, we talked about generosity. Last week, we talked about worship. This week, I wanted to title the message, Comfortable in the Tension. Comfortable in the tension. And those words sound like an oxymoron because they don't really go together. The definition of an oxymoron is when two words don't seem to fit. So when I say comfortable in the tension, this week is all about vision. It's trying to cast some vision for TWCC. And the way I'm going to cast that is through the eyes of what Jesus casted vision for his followers. You see, when you look at the words comfortable and tension, they don't fit in church world for a couple of reasons. One, a church that gets comfortable is in danger. A church that gets comfortable gets stagnant. A church that gets comfortable and is not moving forward in a healthy direction oftentimes gets stagnant. Has anybody ever seen those old nasty ponds out on farms where they got that green slimy sludge stuff? It's because nothing's coming in, nothing's going out. You're just comfortable, and that can be a dangerous place. In church, the word tension is super uncomfortable. Because when you talk about tension in church, what often follows tension in church is somebody's upset, somebody's mad, the pastor's done something wrong, moral failure, split churches. When you talk about tension, it creates a feeling in a lot of us. And I know Deep South Church, there's many of you in here this morning that you came to this church after a long time of being out of church because you had a bad experience in church, whether it was a church split or a pastor failed you or somebody talked trash, whatever reason it was, you walked away from church. But today, comfortable in the tension, we're going to talk about what is actually a healthy tension. We're going to talk about how not to be a me-centered church. There is healthy tension. When you go to work out, which some of you do, I don't. I'm getting ready to do a marriage class starting this Wednesday, and I titled it Marriage Fitness. I've had 3 people ask me if we're exercising. Do I look like I exercise? But today when you talk about tension and you work out, sometimes tension, breaking down muscles, moving the muscles repeatedly actually grows you. It actually strengthens you. And so this morning we're going to talk about what is a healthy tension. Jesus called his church to have healthy tension. Believe it or not, a good, healthy church will have healthy tension. It's growing pains as you grow. See, one thing that if you're kind of new here, welcome. I'm kind of new here myself. I know some of you that have called TWCC home for quite a while. I preached my first message here on Thanksgiving of last year. It was kind of I don't know what you call that. You call that an audition or a guest speaker. I don't know what you call it. But I had the opportunity to preach here, and then from there, I had the amazing opportunity to come here as a pastor. And I know for some of you that have been here a long time, I am a Category 4 hurricane that blew into this church. Like, I got a buddy down in Hawaii who's in the military, and he shot me a thing on Facebook, and he said, I've been overseas, and I faced the Taliban, but this Category 5 is scaring me to death. And I look at our church, and I know to some, we kind of had a little business meeting the other day, and I started it with this. I said, man, I know it's been crazy. I know things have changed. I know life seems like it's going at 100 miles an hour. And I would like to apologize to that, but I'm not going to because it's going to keep churning. But here's the truth of it. I know that when change happens, it can create tension. Jesus created tension all throughout his ministry. He still, over 2,000 years later, creates tension. Don't believe me? Walk into work, get around a water cooler, and go, hey man, you follow Jesus? Watch what happens. It'll suck the air out of the room. Everybody will get quirky. Everybody will say, well, you know, you talk about God all day long. Talk about Paul, you talk about the Bible. But when you mention the name Jesus, it creates tension. And it's a healthy tension. Jesus' whole ministry as he was traveling his area of the world created tension. He was constantly butting up against the status quo. He was constantly butting up against the religion of the day, against social problems. Every time you thought Jesus was going to zig, he zagged. Every time you thought he was making a point about one thing, he flips it on his head and he makes a totally different point. And the brilliance of Jesus is he managed to work his way through all of the tension. And people began to follow him. And then even his followers, tension, as they began planting churches. 2,000 years later, we're still struggling with some of the same tension. So this morning, I wanted to kind of cast some vision. I hope I can explain some of the reasons that I do what I do sometimes. I think some of you have some very legitimate questions. I think some of you, if you hear what's going on, you'll be like, man, that's exciting. But I'm also going to pre-warn you, I've only been here 7 months, and I'm going to repeat 2 of my messages within this message. And the reason is because I believe fundamentally so deep in the ending of this message, but we'll get to that. One of the things about a church with tension is it's constantly moving, and it's growing fast. Just so you guys know, towards the end of last year, we were averaging about 190 people. On any given day right now, we're got about 400 people. And so when you go and you double, the average rate of growth for a church, 4%. Our rate of growth here at TWCC over the past 7 months has been over 100%. It's tension. We've had to create space. We've had to create chairs, which, by the way, we have paid for the chairs. Congratulations. Give yourselves a big round of applause. But when you grow that fast, it creates tension. And here's some reasons that it creates tension. Is because you go from like pews to chairs. That creates tension. It goes from needing to put more chairs in because what we said is we wanted to keep one service as long as we can because we love the fact that we're all under one roof worshiping together. And when you split to 2 services, sometimes it creates tension because you're like, I don't know those people. I would argue right now, this side over here barely knows this side now. It's tension and it's fun. I had somebody suggest that they were like, hey, we should all wear name tags. Here's my suggestion. Go up and introduce yourself. This side of the room, after service, I want you to go over to this side of the room. But they look really hungry, so they're probably going to be in the gym. So go to the gym and find them. But it's tension. It's healthy tension. We've had extreme growth, and it's been fun. It's been fun. But as we continue to move forward, there's some key elements that I think through radical following of Jesus that God calls his church to do. This morning we're going to talk about those. A church that unconditionally loves. And I know some of y'all are like, man, I've heard this over and over and over and over, and I'm going to keep preaching it over and over and over and over. And there's a reason why. Matthew 22, 35 through 40. One of them, an expert in religious law, tried to trap him with the question. They were always trying to trap Jesus. They said, teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? What's the most important in the law? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then he goes on to say this. A second and equally important commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And then he sums up this statement right here. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments. Every bit of Moses' law, every bit of Old Testament law, every bit of Paul's teaching, every bit of the scripture, Jesus is saying this. He's saying it all wraps into these 2 commandments. Love God. Love your neighbor. Love God. Love your neighbor. I'm not going to hang here really long today. I want to start with kind of my premise. I'm a Jesus guy. I start with Jesus. When you ask me a question, I try to dig in to the gospel side of the Bible, and I'm going to try my best to find an answer. If I don't find it there, I jump into the New Testament, and then I kick into the Old Testament. I love Peter. I love Paul. I love the lessons of the Old Testament, but truth be told, I am a probably tick-right Jesus guy. I believe that Jesus gave us the majority of answers for today's problems. I believe if we would just follow His teaching, that our world and our nation would look radically different. When Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, He's saying this. He said, God wants our first. He wants our best. He wants us to put Him first, above all things. And then when He says, love your neighbor, this is the part that when I see TWCC, it's one of the things that drew me here because I think we do a good job of this. But when He says love your neighbor, the question becomes, who is our neighbor? Who is our neighbor? You see, this whole verse isn't wrapped up in some parable. It's not wrapped up in some story. Jesus blatantly, bluntly, in red letters says we are called to love our neighbors. And then He followed it up with a verse in John 13:35. It said, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples. Not by the fish sticker on your car. Not by the t-shirt that you wear. Not by the clothes or the songs that you sing. He said, but this is how they will know that you're my disciple. That you love one another. You love your neighbor as yourself. You love each other. Who does each other entail? Everybody. Who is your neighbor? Anybody you come in contact with. Anybody you come in contact with. God says you are called to love. Church is honestly one of the most segregated places in America on Sunday. White people go to white people church and listen to white people music and do Highlands Hop. Black people go to black people church. Hispanic people go to Hispanic church. Asian people go to Asian church. Baptists go to their church. Methodists go to their church. Church of God goes to their church. The melting pot comes here. But Sunday is honestly one of the most segregated days. And we have such hate for other denominations. Oftentimes as we'll run down other churches. I hear it all the time about Highlands. I pick on them a lot because I'm a Highlands guy from Texas. But I pick on them a lot, but I hear this all the time. People are like, well, Highlands is just a mile wide and an inch deep. Can I tell you something? We need to be praying for Church of the Highlands. They're reaching people that we're not reaching. We need to be praying for Northport Baptist down the road because they're reaching people we're not reaching. We need to pray for St. Mark's Methodist and Christ Harbor Methodist and the Catholic Church down the road. And we need to pray for churches all across our community. We need to be the church that loves our neighbor. And our neighbor goes across color. It goes across denomination. It goes across belief. We're called to love unconditionally. Bottom line, period. End of story. By Jesus Himself. And so my vision for our church is that we become the most intercultural church out there. That we become a church that our doors are wide open and every race feels great coming here. That we're the most multicultural, multi-generation, old people, young people, black, white, Latino. It does not matter because we're all under the kingdom of God. And we're going to be spending eternity together. That's a long time. And if you got a problem with it here, you're in for a long eternity. And I would actually argue this. If you have racism in your heart, you're not following Christ. By this, they will know that you're my disciple. That you love one another. And Jesus modeled it. The Samaritan, the one that people walked across the street not to talk to. The lady who had 5 husbands. Oh my goodness, she had a past. The lady who was caught in adultery and drug in front of everybody where they were going to stone her to death. Jesus said this. He said, where are your accusers? She said, they're gone. And He said, neither do I accuse you. The Son of God doesn't accuse. And He welcomed this lady into His circle. Wow. He showed us over and over and over again of what unconditional love looks like. So as a church, I want us praying for other churches. As a church, I want us to get out of our comfort zone. And it's tension. When you talk about race in the Deep South, there's tension. See, people think I'm from Texas. I grew up just in northeast Alabama. And the racial divide there is horrible. And since I've moved back, I'm like, man, that tension is still there. But in church, that tension should not be there. The reason I'm passionate about multicultural is there's a guy by the name of Sergeant Edwards, Sergeant First Class Edwards. There was a guy by the name of Staff Sergeant Knight. There was a guy by the name of Corporal Cruz. And then there was Specialist Poporowski Polak from New York City. And you know what I did with all of these guys? We stood shoulder to shoulder. And we wore the same uniform. And we bled the same color blood. And can I say something? And if this bugs you good, I hope I'm stepping all over your toes. The same blood that was shed for you and me, it's the same blood that was shed for them, whoever they are in your world. We should be inviting. We should be loving. And my vision for this church is we become the most welcoming, loving church. People may walk out of here and say the preaching stinks, but I felt loved. I'm okay with that because they'll come back or I'll get better or fired, one of the two. Unconditional love. I'm also looking for a church that's radically generous. See, this creates tension because you start talking about money in church. Some of you are like, man, I finally got them to come to church. You're going to talk about money. I'm not talking about money. I believe in tithing 10%. I believe it's biblical. It's days long. Jesus backed it up. God commands it. I'm not talking about tithing. I'm talking about generosity. I want to become the most generous church in town. And by that, I mean simply this. The reason that we do Egg the Cities, the reason that we do Beans, Bullets, and Barbecue, the reasons that we do veterans appreciations, the reason we do missions about trafficking, the reason we do all of that is because I'm going to tell you something. Generosity of a church is not something you see every day. It's not something you see every day. If I had $1 for everybody that walked up at Egg the City and went, this is free? You guys are just doing it? Why are you doing it? There's a catch, right? To which I go, no, we're just doing it. Have a hot dog. Have some cotton candy. Have some fun. But see, out of y'all's generosity, we were able to reach over 6,000 people in our community. Wow. Some of you are here because you came to Egg the City. Some of you are here because you were a veteran and you came to a breakfast and you thought, man, that's a place I would like to hang out. And for me as a pastor, I want us to become radically generous. Our goal as a church is to give 10% to missions. Our long-term goal is to give 50% to missions. You would be shocked. We have over 20 missions that we actively support, that we write checks to, that we send people to. Kairos, Honduras, Kenya. There's many places that people go every day. We've got local, state, national, and world missions. We want to be a missions-minded church, but to be a missions-minded church, you have to have a heart of generosity. And so when we handed out the cards, all that was a tool to say, I want you to start looking for opportunities. We're going to continue to hand out those cards, even after the series is over. Because this is what I want people when they get a card. I got a card the other day. It was fun. I pulled up to McDonald's. I was buying a salad. Pulled up to McDonald's and the lady goes, hey, your meal's taken care of. And she handed me a radical card. So I don't know which one of you it was, but those were good nuggets. Thank you. But you know what she did? She asked me. She goes, I've gotten 3 or 4 of these. This is pretty cool. And I said, well, I hear the church is pretty awesome. She said, where's it at? I said, it's up on Highway 69. And I said the same thing I always do. The preaching's marginal, but the worship's amazing. Come and join us. And she said, I think I'm going to check it out. She goes, this is just cool. It's little stuff. It's little stuff that when we have the heart of generosity like Jesus had, it's not even with money stuff. It's with time. I watched over the past few weeks as people have jumped out of cars and helped people, as people have wandered into our church with major problems and major dysfunction and major issues. I've watched people stop what they're doing. The thing I love about this church is it's interruptible. It's interruptible. We're not in holy huddles. We're able to be interrupted. I had a situation. I walked over. I was like, hey, can I borrow? Hey, can I borrow? There wasn't a thought. There wasn't a question. There wasn't anything. On any given Sunday, I'll walk out into our parking lot, and we got people under a hood, under a car. Last week, we had cops in the parking lot. I love it. I don't know why they were here. I don't want to know why. But I'm all right with it. Generosity, a heart of generosity. Lane Kiffin. Yeah, I'm quoting Lane Kiffin in church. Still can't believe I'm doing this. He just wrote an article, and it was a pretty good article. I got it on Facebook. My dad sent it. And he said he's talking about his Christian walk and how he was immature when he was younger and all of that. But he made this crazy statement. He was handed a book by the University of Tennessee's chaplain back when he was coaching there for the 3 months he coached there. And he was given a book that changed his life. You want to talk about a divine intersection. What if this was a book? What if that 6 months he was at Tennessee was actually the catalyst that changed his life and changed his kingdom? But he got this book. It's by a pastor by the name of Rick Warren. He's a West Coast guy. And he said on the first page were the 4 words that changed my life. He said, it's not about you. That's all Rick Warren needed to say. It immediately sunk in, and I've been telling my players and coworkers that line ever since. It's not about you. It's not about you. You see, it's easy to say that. It's easy to slap a bumper sticker on a car. But when you actually say, God, we're gonna point to you in everything that we do. God, it's all about you. It's not what I want. When you pray that prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is saying, you know what, God, I want it, but hey, if you've got a better plan, I'm going to trust that you're a sovereign God. I'm going to trust in your promise, and I'm going to go ahead and move forward in my generosity, trusting that you're going to handle the rest, because it's not about me. It's not about the chairs. It's not about the furniture. It's not about my parking spot. It's not about my seat that I sit in. I want a church that's so radically generous. When you see somebody that you don't know, you jump up out of your seat and you walk them over to your seat and you sit them in it. And hopefully if they've got a seat open beside them, you sit down with them and you tell them your name. And you know what? This may get you out of comfort zone on a Sunday that you're not talking to people that you know. I want you talking to people that you don't know. I want you making circles everywhere. I want us to become the most relational, generous church in Tuscaloosa and Northport. I want us to be radically relational. And see, Jesus, when you talk about generosity, when you talk about all of that, Jesus actually takes it to the next level. He says generosity is a heart thing. Helping widows, helping the poor, helping people far from me, it's a heart thing. I want us to be the most radically generous church out there. I also want us to be a church that is life-giving, not spirit-killing. I want to be a church that's life-giving, not spirit-killing. And by that, I mean, this is Deep South Church. And Deep South Church, I was actually meeting with a pastor up in Gadsden area that I was up, and he had just planted a church up there. And he made this weird comment. He said, you know what? He said, I moved from Oklahoma, and I feel like this area might be the most spiritually oppressed place I've ever been. But I didn't think that because it had the most churches I've ever seen. And I thought about that for a little while, and I prayed about that. And in Deep South Church, there's so many divisions, and there's so much offense, and there's so much anger. And we talked a lot about that a couple of weeks ago, and we said to live life unoffended. To live life unoffended. And if you get offended, to be able to forgive immediately. And I think some of us, the reason we walk away from church is because we've been so hurt, we've been so offended, or we've not been able to forgive, we've not been able to let go. I want to be a part of a church that is radically unoffended, that is radically forgiving. I want to be a church that encourages and lifts up. The Bible talks about the mouth almost as much as it talks about anything. Rather than criticizing, rather than complaining, I want to be a church that uplifts people. When you talk about spiritual gifts, I hear all of these other gifts that people love having. You know who I love people having the gift of? Encouragement. The spiritual gift of encouragement. They walk into a room and they're just able to encourage people. Think of what the world would look like at your workplace if everybody complimented each other. rather than tore each other down. Think about what church would look like if everybody complimented each other, if everybody spoke life, if everybody congratulated, if everybody put their egos, their control, their thoughts down on the table, and they said, I'm going to put my stuff aside and I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to speak words of life, not words of death. The Bible talks about it, that the tongue is such a powerful weapon. Proverbs 18:21 says the tongue can bring death or life. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. Gossip is a huge thing. It's even more prevalent, and it's sad to me that it's more prevalent in church. Now we wrap it in prayer groups, and we wrap it in spirituality, and we say things like, oh, bless their heart. My grandmother used to say that about girls I brought home. I used to think it was a compliment until I found out what she was really meaning. And I can't say that in church because I preached on that 2 months ago. But bless your heart don't mean bless your heart in the deep south. Oftentimes prayer doesn't mean prayer. Oftentimes prayer means we want to talk about somebody. And it splits churches, and people walk away from churches because they get burned. I make this statement, and it's harsh, but sometimes it's true. Christianity is oftentimes the one place that they shoot their wounded. It ought to be the place that you can walk in, and regardless of what's going on, that you have a safe place, that you have a place of people. That's the thing I love about the men of this church is you can walk in and be struggling. And you can talk to, and nobody's judging you. Nobody's going to kick you out. Nobody's going to be shocked beyond imagination. But it's a place that you can walk in and we can uplift people regardless of what their struggle is. Regardless of what they're going through. And that we bring them to the cross every time. That we point them back to the one who can change their circumstances. You know, oftentimes we talk about living righteously, and oftentimes we talk about steps into Christian living and how to set ourselves apart. Can I tell you something? One of the ways that you'll be set apart is to begin speaking life, to begin speaking hope, to begin speaking encouragement, because we live in a culture, it's just not normal. It's just not normal. If you vote this way or that way, you're hated. If you root for this team or that team, you're hated. If you kneel or stand, you're hated. And I'm not saying any of them are right or wrong. I'm just saying this, is that we sit there, and social media has done the best job of it, is we rip into people online. And the truth is, can I tell you something? When you rip somebody down and you tear somebody down on Facebook or Instagram, you're still tearing somebody down. It hurts the heart just as much to read it as it does to hear it. What would it look like if 400 people walked into the community this week and spoke nothing but life? What would it look like if we spoke nothing but encouragement? What if it looked like when we were at the checkout aisle at Walmart, the one that's open, and we're in the 10-item checkout line, and the lady in front of you's got 35 items, I counted. And she turned around and she said, I'm so sorry. I said, I don't care. I don't care. Because you know what? The 3 minutes I'm going to stand here is probably not going to wreck my week. And I just started talking to her. She had a little kid in the basket. She probably thought I was a creeper. I don't know. I was like, what are you doing? Having a good week? But you just talk, just encourage. In the school lines, on the ball field. What would the umpire do if you ran out and went, man, great call? You don't have to worry about that at Kentucky. Anyway, I got to get off of that. I'm sorry. I know there's some of y'all are awesome at Kentucky. But not the umpires. I want steps towards becoming fully devoted followers of Christ. And I know oftentimes I've been labeled this my whole ministry, 15 years of it. I've been labeled, they're like, oh, you're just evangelistic. And it's true. And I'm probably not going to shy away from that, because here's my thing, is whether it's unconditional love, whether it's unconditional forgiveness, whether it's moving to becoming fully devoted to following Christ, whether it's sanctification process, whatever it is, whatever words you want to use, whatever you want to wrap that in, I believe wholeheartedly that it comes back to Jesus Christ. And that's why when I did this series called Radical, it's all about Jesus. It was about Jesus 2,000 years ago. It was about Jesus 1,000 years ago. It's about Jesus today, and it's going to be about Jesus 2,000 years from now. And without Jesus Christ, The rest of it just doesn't matter. The lights and the slides and the bells and the whistles, without Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter. And He is the only one that can change your circumstances. I want to be a part of a church that speaks life, that speaks encouragement. And through that, people come to know Jesus Christ. I want to be a church that aggressively takes on gossip. I want to be a church that if you hear gossip and you hear the foxes on the vines that are trying to tear apart, that you walk up and instead of engaging in it, you go, man, you know what? That sounds like it really bothers you. I tell you what, let's go talk to that person about it. And we do it biblically as men and women should do, where we go to our brothers, where if we get offended, we go to our brothers and we talk and we work it out, and then we continue moving forward in the plan that God has for us. The only way for our church to continue to survive is to speak life and to kick out gossip, to kick out words of death, kick out criticism. Speak life. Be a church that is radically in love and radically encouraging. I want to be a church that lands on grace a lot. You see, Jesus came with a full measure of truth and grace. And the reason I want to be a church that lands on grace a lot is I need grace a lot. I need grace a lot. You see, oftentimes I want truth for other people because it's easy for me to sit back and go, well, you shouldn't have and you could have. And then there's days that I go, man, could you forgive me? I'm going to step in it a lot. I'm going to fail a lot. And I need grace. And by that extension, my hope is that we become a church full of grace. That there is truth. Jesus didn't just live in grace. He actually raised the standards. But that we're a church that's okay with people having a past. We're okay with people making mistakes. That we uplift and we circle around and we walk with, not judge over. Striving to be a church full of grace, because the one that we follow was full of grace. I want to be a church that's fun, authentic, and relevant. Fun, authentic, and relevant. You want to talk about an oxymoron, fun and church. It doesn't go together. And I've never understood why. I have an issue with non-fun churches. I went to one. I grew up in one. And here's what I believe. You know, we talk about millennials and how everybody, when they get to college, they run away from the church and we blame it on culture. I think part of the problem is church. I really do. And this is going to step on some toes. When I say I want a fun church, this is what I want. I want a rocking God's Not Dead song followed by a Holy Spirit hymn. I want you to 80s hairband bob your head or Highlands hop your hand. I don't care what you do. But I want you to have fun in worship. I want that kids ministry over there to be loud. It's not a funeral. Church is not a funeral. I think we've done a bad job of describing heaven, because I used to hear that heaven, you know, we're going to sit on a cloud and play a harp. I got no musical talent. And playing a harp for eternity does not sound like heaven. But that's the picture that we give people. And I believe that heaven I believe it's so amazing. I can only imagine what heaven's going to be. I can only imagine that it's going to be full of amazing worship. I can only imagine that it's going to be full of sitting around and loving people and talking to those who have gone by and learning. And heaven is going to be exciting, but yet we walk into a church, it's like a funeral. I tell this story all the time. I grew up in a church and there was a deacon and I ran in church, which you can't do, I guess. But I ran a lot and I jumped pews and I talked, and my dad had this signal and he would put his arm over me, you know, like all loving, and then he'd pinch. And when I was in youth, I'd sit right about in there. We called it the 50-yard line. I'd talk. And I'd get that look from across the room, like some of y'all have already given this morning. It's like, you better be quiet. But I'd go to Sunday school, and I was rambunctious, and I had this deacon. He was 95 years old then. I think he's still alive now. But he had a really long finger, and he was always pointing it at me. And he called me by my last name. He's like, well, more. Don't you want to go to heaven? This is God's house. And all I could think of was, not if you're going to be there. Being real. I was told to sit down, be quiet, don't talk. I had to wear clothes I didn't normally wear. I had to act ways I didn't normally act. I wasn't allowed to be a kid. When I look at God's creation, I see deer. When you watch little baby deer running through the field, what are they doing? They're running, they're leaping, they're playing, they're having a great time. You look at little baby calves, what are they doing? Running, leaping, playing, having a great time. We look at our kids, what do we let them do at home? Run, hop, have fun. But then we get to church and we turn it into this environment. It's like, don't talk, don't run. And then we sing songs like, I got the joy down in my heart. No, you don't. It needs to be a place that's fun. I want kids to wake you up in the morning and go, Mom, can we go to church? Dad, can we go to church? I want it to be a place when they walk in here, they don't want to sit in here and listen to me. They want to be over there. I want our youth to have an environment where they walk in and it's rocking and they can be them. And they can be loud. And that way when they get to college, they have a place to come to. And they're excited to still come. I want a church that's fun. I also want a church that's authentic. I want a church where you can be you. I want a church where I can be me. I'm going to try to be the best me that I can be, and you're going to try to be the best you that you can be, and we're going to work through that. But here's what I want. I want a church that's authentic. We got problems, but church is where you put on a mask. Church is where you walk in and use cliches. Blessed and highly favored when you're having the worst week of your life. How are you doing? Awesome when you got the worst news from a doctor. How's your kids doing? Oh, they're doing great. Y'all aren't even speaking. You walk in, you sit in Sunday school with your spouse, and you put your arm around them, and y'all just screamed at each other as you got out of the car. I want to be a place where you can walk in and be you. And then I want a place where we can be relevant. The things that worked in the 70s don't work now. Things that worked in the 80s don't work now. Things that work in the 90s don't work. The things that work now aren't going to work 10 years from now. Scripture never changes, but the reason we do all of this is because it reaches people. And I want us to continue to be relevant. Scripture never changes. The gospel never changes. I believe it's inerrant from front to back, and it's the holy inspired breath of God written through man. But the way that we can deliver that message, God gives us so much freedom in that. And I did this little deal. Robin, come on up and make me sound really good. I did this a couple of months ago, and this is part of that. I'm going to repeat the process, and I'm going to do this every year. When I talk about a church that's fun, authentic, and relational, when I talk about a church that's authentic, here's what I mean by that. Here's what I mean by you be you. Is I put some chairs up. But one of my favorite passages of Jesus as we close out Radical was this. It's Luke 14, 15 through 24. And this is Jesus. Hearing this, a man sitting at the table with Jesus exclaimed, "What a blessing it will be to attend a banquet in the kingdom of God." What a blessing. How exciting is it going to be at a banquet sitting there with Jesus Christ? And then Jesus replied with this story. This is how Jesus was explaining his kingdom. This is how Jesus was explaining eternity. He said, "A man prepared a great feast and he sent out many invitations. When the banquet was ready, he sent his servant to tell the guests, 'Come, the banquet is ready.' But they all began making excuses. One said, 'I've just bought a field and must inspect it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've just bought 5 pair of oxen and I want to try them out. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.' The servant returned and he told his master what they had said, and his master was furious. He said, 'Go quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. Go invite the people nobody else is inviting. Go invite the drug addicts. Go invite the addicted. Go invite the people far from God. Go invite the guy sitting on his recliner drinking a beer. Go invite the guy that's out on the lake right now. Go into the alley. Go into the streets. Bring people to my table.' After the servant had done this, he reported, 'There's still room for more.' So his master said, 'Go into the country lanes and behind the hedges and urge anyone you find to come, so the house will be full. For none of those I first invited will even get the smallest taste of my banquet.'" See, this is what I believe church should look like. It should radically love people. And it should radically invite people. That's evangelism. That every Sunday for 52 weeks out of the year, I'm going to invite people to the cross. Because I believe without that, all of the rest of it is for nothing. Because if you spend eternity, and I believe in a heaven and a hell, and if you spend eternity in hell, it's being far from God. And I'm telling you, there's people in here this morning that don't know Jesus, that have never taken that step. And can I just tell you, if you're one of them, great place to be. You're more than welcome to hang, as long as you need. And then I want a church that makes circles. This is the discipleship part of it. I want us to be so welcoming, and I want us to be so engaging, and I want us to be so fun that people want to hang out in circles and do life together. I want our parking lot to have golf carts in it, driving people up, not because people can't walk, but because you get to engage with them. I don't want door stops at the front door. I want people to engage. I want you to see somebody you don't know and stop talking to the one that you do and walk over and go introduce yourself. And then I want you to invite them to a group, because through groups, discipleship happens, life change happens. I want you to find your purpose, because I believe if you accept Christ, you make a circle, your next step is find your purpose. You're called. Golly, you're called. You're talented. And you can take a step, start serving God, and then give generously. When you start giving outside of yourself, and I'm not talking about tithing, I'm talking about give generously. If your neighbor's got a tree down, go cut it up. And then tell your story. All of you have a story. Some are good and pure and perfect. Some are bad and nasty and dark. But they're just chapters. The rest of your story is being written. And so this is what I mean by authentic. TWCC is custom built. They were planted 5 years ago to reach the community of Northport and Tuscaloosa, to be a hugely outreach-oriented missional church. It is custom built for several kinds of people. It's built for the guy who wears a coat. Can I tell you something? God does not care what you wear, as long as it's modest. But God doesn't care. Neither do I. I serve for an audience of one. But what I wear doesn't determine my salvation. What you wear doesn't determine your salvation. So this is what you need to hear me say. Is this church is custom built where if you're a coat wearing dude, man, you're welcome. We need you. If you feel comfortable wearing a tie, we need you. I'm sweating like a champ up here in this thing. I don't know why you'd wear it, but I don't care. But see, when you have a seat at the table, this is for my dad. I said it then. Sorry, going through some health stuff. This is for the guy who's been in church. A seat at the table is for the guy who's been at church for 30 years. Seat at the table is for a guy who likes hymns. We're going to sing hymns. Seat at the table is for a guy who likes to dress up, whether it's for tradition or professionalism, or whether he just likes to dress up once a week. But we have a seat at the table for him. We also have a seat at the table. Some of y'all are freaked out. I'm going to put shoes on the altar. This is for the guy who shows up in work boots, or the girl who shows up in work boots. They got grease under their fingers because they just got off of work. This is for the military guy or the law enforcement guy or the guy who has a really hard time believing in a God because of the evil that they've seen. How can a good God let what happened happen? How can scraping a child off the pavement, how can watching your buddy be killed, how can? And I'm okay with that question because there's room at the table for this guy. I'm passionate about this guy because he's got questions. And I need this guy to help me answer these questions. See how the healthy flow of life works? And this guy was in the Army. That's why we're so passionate about our veterans. And here's the crazy thing. I don't see it as much in Alabama. But if somebody wears a ball cap in here, don't tell them to take it off. Say, welcome. Come sit by me. Because there's a spot at the table. There's also a spot at the table for the guys that are wearing board shorts and flip-flops. For the guy who pulls up in the parking lot and he's got his bass boat and he's coming to church and he's going to hit the lake afterwards. I'm all right with that. It's for the guy who walks in and wears shorts because he likes to wear shorts. It's for the guy who wears shorts because it's 100 degrees or you never know when the power is going to go out. This is me. This is me. I also want a place at the table for children to run and to enjoy and to have fun. You see, when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, he talks about a table. There's room at the table for you. So whether you're this guy or whether you're this kid or somewhere in between, can I tell you something? There is a place for you at God's table. I'm going to constantly invite you to the kingdom. I'm probably going to lean more towards evangelism because I'm passionate about it. And as long as there's somebody in this community that doesn't know Christ, we're going to keep talking about it. We're getting ready to move into a series called Fear Factor. It's all about fear. Every core emotion we have revolves around fear. We're going to hit some deep topics. We're going to hit some topics that are going to rip some scabs off. But this is what I know. This is a safe place to be. And we want to walk with you through that. And I often don't do good at casting vision. But here's what I believe. Know Christ, make a circle, find purpose, give generously, and tell your story. It's the process to life change. It's a process. But this is also what I believe. You have massive impact, and God has a plan for your life. And I'm so far down the road most of the times that I don't communicate well, and I'll try to get better. But the reason I'm so far down the road is I eat, breathe, and sleep you. I do. My wife eats, breathes, and sleeps you. We love you. This church loves you. I watch guys meet for hours on end, and it's about you. It's all about you. It's about the people who walk in this church. And I want to be a church that loves unconditionally, that gives generously, that's fun, authentic, and relevant. And I believe we can. I believe that's what God has called us to be. So I don't know if I've answered any questions this morning, but I hope as we move forward as a church, we become the most radical church in Tuscaloosa and Northport. I hope people keep going, I don't know what it is about them, but I like them. And through that, they come to know Jesus. Through that, they step back in church after being out a long time. Through that, they put down the fact that they got burnt in church, and they give it another try. I've always said, if I can get somebody to give God a chance, I believe He can do the rest. I want to be that church. If you're in here this morning, you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, why wait? Come be part of the family. Be a part of the church that will walk you through that process. You don't need me to do it. Simple prayer. God, beginning today, I choose you. Come into my life. Be my Lord and Savior. Forgive me of my sins. God, I choose you. And then next week, we'll dunk you. Some of you I may need to hold under longer, but that's okay. It's okay. But I need you to hear me when I say this. I love you. I love you.